Good to have everyone here. Well, today is a big day. We are leaving Egypt. We're actually leaving Egypt. We're going to make our way to the Promised Land. We're not going to get there today. It might be 40 years before we get there. I don't know. It's good. 40 years, but it's not that many chapters, so I don't know. So hopefully it won't take us 40 years. But we're going to leave. This is the Exodus. And I've got up here on the screen a way to look at this. So instead of getting into, we could say getting into the weeds, but like getting into the forest and looking around on the forest floor, we're going to back up so we can see the forest. What's going on? So we've had the 10 plagues. That's where we got to last week. And when we get to Exodus 11, we get this interesting narrative. And one of the things that I want us to do through this study is to see the narrative that the Bible is going at. The way it's teaching us through the way it presents things. We have a tendency to look at the Bible in two ways. Like, there's history, and a lot of what we've been reading has been history. It's narrative of things that happened, and we get very concerned with, well, what happened here? You know, where did it happen? The facts of what happened. And then the other side of it is commands. And we get very interested in, well, what does this command say, and how do we follow this command? And we see here that it's actually, the Bible's going to interweave the two in this way that it's trying to tell us something both with the commands and with the narrative that's you can't see by getting into the weeds and trying to figure out what happened or what this command needs. You need to see the whole thing, the story that the Bible is telling. And we've talked about questions. Always the biggest question on our mind is, well, what does God want us to learn from this? And sometimes we find other questions that are embedded in the text that help us find that. But I want us to keep us focused on what is God trying to teach us through this. And so we get here to Exodus 11. We have the last plague, the death of the firstborn. And it's a very short chapter that just explains what happens. It's sort of like all of the other plagues. It explains what happens in this plague. And that's what we have in Exodus 11. And then we get to Exodus 12. And for the first time in this story, we've kind of switched. And we're going to get a lot of instructions about the Passover. Here's how you eat it. Here's what you do. Here's what you don't do. And this makes sense, right? Because they're going to eat the Passover that night. And so it kind of flows with the narrative that Moses is going to tell them, okay, here's what we're going to do tonight. But if you read through that chapter, you will see that this isn't necessarily just about what we're doing tonight. Because they're going to celebrate that Passover every year forever. And a lot of what this chapter is about is the details of how you're going to celebrate this thing later, not necessarily what you're going to do tonight. And so it kind of sticks out a bit for that reason, because it's not really just the narrative of what's happening. It's a lot of instructions about this feast that they're going to have. And then we get to Exodus 13. And the first part of that is going to be something that looks like it belongs in Leviticus. It's the instructions for redeeming a firstborn. And this definitely sticks out. Well, let me go back. The part of Exodus 12 has the actual Exodus. And I put here Passover sandwich. That's a little play on words, because during the Passover there is a sandwich. You make a sandwich out of the bread and the lamb. So right in the middle of those instructions, it actually has the part where they actually leave, where Pharaoh tells them to go, and they get up and they go. And then there's more instructions about what happens, with foreigners that are in your house. What do you do? Well, they got to eat it. Well, what about if anyone doesn't eat it? So you have the Passover sandwich in 12, and then the first part of Exodus 13 are all these instructions about how you redeem a firstborn. And John's talked about the broken neck donkey. The donkey is unclean. You can't sacrifice a donkey. You could redeem it. I think you can redeem it with money, but if not, you got to take it out and you got to break its neck. And I have redeeming the firstborn. So it's the firstborn humans your male children that you have. And it's also the firstborn of your flocks. And it turns out the Bible's going to use two different words for this. If it's an animal, the word means the first from the womb. The pater. The first from the womb. But if it's talking about a human, it uses this term behor. We've talked about the behor. Now, something is interesting. How many behors have we had since we got to the Abraham narrative? Who's the first behor that Abraham has? Isaac, right? He chooses Isaac as his behor. And then who is Isaac's behor? Jacob.
Who did he want or who did he?
Yeah, who actually ends up becoming behor? Jacob becomes the behor. And who is Jacob's behor? Joseph. You could say, well, he certainly picks Joseph, and in part of the story, we're going to see that it's definitely Joseph. Joseph gets the behor responsibilities. He gets the behor. He gets the birthright as well. So we've had three of those. How many of those were firstborns of their father? 0. None of them are firstborns. So let's go on, and we'll come back to this. So the next part, in the middle of Exodus 13, now we're going to go back to narrative. And they're going to leave Exodus. They're going to wander around through the desert. Pharaoh is going to pursue them with his officials and his chariots. They're going to go through the sea. The sea's going to, they're going to walk through on dry ground. The sea's going to crash in on Pharaoh. And then in Exodus 15, there's going to be singing and dancing. And so our question is, by putting it together this way, what is God trying to tell us? So what really sticks out here is this doesn't belong here. This just really, it doesn't belong in this part of the Bible. If you look at these 5 things, which one of those would you say that doesn't go here? I mean that's a good answer. After, yeah, you could put that. It's not the one I'm going for, but. We understand why they're singing and dancing, and they did sing and dance, so that goes there. Well, which one of these would you say this is out of place? Why did you put this here? Redeeming the firstborn. It doesn't have anything to do with the narrative. It's not something they're going to do now. They're not going to do it for 40 years because he says it's when you go into the land you're going to do this. They're not doing this in the desert. At least I don't think so. So this is for much later, and it just gets inserted here. And so we might ask, well, why? Why has God put this here? And God has made a big deal about this being about the firstborn. In the very beginning of the story, God calls Israel his behor. And he tells Pharaoh, you've got to let my behor go, or I'm going to take your behor. It's really about that. So we might ask, well, what does it mean for God to have a behor? What does a behor do? What's the purpose of the behor? To take care of the family, to lead the family, and to lead the family in what exactly? The father's mission. Whatever the father is about, he has got to carry it on. And so then what does it mean to carry it on after the father's gone? We should insert that part, right? Because while the father is still alive, the behor is just getting ready for his mission. And it's once the father departs, the behor starts doing his job. So what does it mean for God to have a behor? Because God, he's not going to depart. So what is this behor going to do?
To show God. To show the Father to others.
Just to show that he's going to show the Father to others. He's going to carry on the Father's mission. Now, you said what God wants. Last time I was teaching, I said, what does God want? And what was your answer, Ron? It was, he wants a relationship with his children. Okay? Now, interestingly, I'm going to go back to something that you taught, Johns. As soon as Jacob steals the promise, the blessing, and he goes off, what happens next in our story? He's going to start to go to Paddan Aram, but he's going to get stopped. He's going to stop for the night in a place. He's going to have a dream. And what is this dream about? It's about him being a bridge to heaven. And so it's like God saying, okay, you're the Behor. This is what it's about. You have got to be a bridge. You have got to connect earth to heaven. You got to show my people how to have a relationship with me. And that's what being a Behor is really about. And so this gets inserted into the narrative here. This nation needs to be God's Behor. Let's go to the next slide. I want to look at the elements of this story. First we have the plague, the death of the Behors of Egypt. Then we're going to have a feast, the Passover. Then we're going to leave a country with their children and their flocks. Now, I insert that there because that was a big deal in the negotiation. That's really what Pharaoh was negotiating about. Well, who's going to go? How far are you going to go? And he's like, well, you can go, but you can't take your flocks, or you can't take your women and children. This time they're leaving with their children and their flocks. They're pursued by the military and the officers. We don't think about that part much because, like, why? What do you mean officers? Well, each of the chariots has officers over them, it says. They're going to cross a body of water. There's going to be the consecration of the firstborn. They're not really doing that, but we have instructions about that. It's what got inserted there. And then at the end, there's going to be singing and dancing. And this is the song that the Israelites sing. And then at the end, the women are going to come. I think they've got tambourines. There's dancing, and they're going to add their part of the song. So these are the elements. So my question is going to be, and this is not really fair, because we didn't even cover this part. Where have we seen these things before? And I'll give you a chance to answer. Like I said, it's not fair. We didn't even cover it. We skipped over it. And it turns out in Genesis 50, you have anybody that wants to read this morning? Any volunteers? All right, John. So Genesis 50, let's start in verse 6 and go through 14.
Pharaoh said, "Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear to do." So Joseph went up to bury his father. All Pharaoh's officials accompanied him, the dignitaries of his court and all the dignitaries of Egypt, besides all the members of Joseph's household and his brothers and those belonging to his father's household. Only their children and their flocks and herds were left in Goshen. Chariots and horsemen also went up with him. It was a very large company. When they reached the threshing floor of Atad near the Jordan, they lamented loudly and bitterly. And there Joseph observed a seven-day period of mourning for his father. When the Canaanites who lived there saw the mourning at the threshing floor at Atad, they said, "The Egyptians are mourning a solemn ceremony of mourning." This is why that place near the Jordan is called Abel Mizraim. So Jacob's sons did as they commanded them. They carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, which Abraham had bought along with the field as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite. After burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt together with his brothers and all the others who had gone with him to bury his father.
All right, so which of these elements did we see in this story? Let's just start with the first one. Did we have a death of a Behor?
Yes.
Yeah, Jacob died. do we have a feast? Now this one's tricky. Do we have a feast anywhere in here? And the answer is not exactly. At least as I can read it, maybe there's a cultural place. But they do stop, and what do they do for 7 days? They mourn. How long does the Passover feast take? 7 days. So in a way, this is like the Passover feast. Now, how long did the first Passover feast take? Well, it takes as long as it takes a hungry man to scarf down his food. Okay? And I have seen Tracy Hawley at a steak.
Yes.
It is not long. So the first one doesn't take 7 days, but we've got 7 days here, which is the time of the Passover. And in our Exodus story, we really have like the regulations for the whole Passover there. Okay, do we have leaving a country with children and flocks?
They stayed behind in Goshen.
Okay, so we have children and flocks mentioned specifically, but they stay behind. So we have that, but we have something different from that. Are they pursued by military and officers?
Not pursued.
Not pursued, but they are escorted by officials and the chariots and the horsemen. Or sorry, chariots and archers is what we have here. So we've got that element there, but it's been reversed. And what did I say? The second one, actually, it was reversed too. We had the element, but it was reversed too. Do we have crossing a body of water? Do we have a body of water in there? The Jordan. And do they have to cross? You'd have to know the geography. So it turns out, for some reason, they come around on the backside of the Jordan, which is actually how the Israelites go to get into Israel. And if they're on the right-hand side of the Jordan, and they're going to go bury their father in Israel, what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to cross the Jordan. So do we have crossing a body of water? Absolutely. Do we have the consecration of the firstborn / Behor? Not exactly. Of course, that's not really part of the story, the Exodus story either. But we do have, this is about Jacob. This is Joseph fulfilling a thing that he swore to his father that he's going to do, which is really tied to him being the Behor. If we go back earlier, so sort of. Do we have singing and dancing? It's the opposite of singing and dancing. Right? We have mourning that's going on here. So several of our elements, we have them there, but we have the opposite. And there's something about this whole story that's the opposite. What is the elephant in the room that's the opposite of what happens in the Exodus? It's the very first verse that John's read. And Pharaoh said, "Go." Joseph comes to him and he's like, "Look, I need to take a journey for a while. I'm going to come back, but I need to take a journey to go do something that I got to do." And Pharaoh says, "Absolutely." And Pharaoh sends with him all the dignitaries, the officials of Egypt, and his military to go with him. And we've got the Canaanites in here. What purpose do the Canaanites serve?
They stood in awe.
They stood in awe of what's going on. They're almost it's like a testament to the people that live in this land. And then at the end of this, we're going to have reconciliation. Because Joseph's brothers, it comes about in a sneaky way. They're worried. They're like, "Oh man, now that Dad is dead, maybe Joseph is really going to get us now." And so they make up this story, and they send a message to Joseph. And they're like, "Dad said that you better forgive us now that he's gone." And Joseph is like, "That? We're still talking about that? I'm over that. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." So now we've got this parallel story. It's interesting. It's definitely paralleling the Exodus. Like, it's not coincidence, right, that we've got all these things lining up. It's also not coincidence that we have all these opposites lining up.
And they took the exact path. So out of Egypt, I mean.
Out of Egypt, they're going to have to go through the wilderness around.
Completely an out of the way path.
Yeah, out of the way path. But you might say that like they took the path that Israel should have taken if they didn't wander around in the wilderness for 40 years. So the path that God intended for Israel to take. Now, this is going to start to explain to us something about what God wants. But before we do that, there's another story. We got to go back a little bit further. So first off, I want to point this out about one of the things I realized studying this is that Joseph sells the food for an exorbitant price. I made a big deal about that, about what Joseph is selling them their own food for everything that they have. Is there someone else that sold a meal for an exorbitant price that we've already had in our story? And Jacob sells to Esau for a bowl of soup for Esau's birthright. An exorbitant price for a meal. And we get to that story, and I said that the Bible has commentary at the end of this, which is not what we're thinking. We're thinking about what Jacob's doing. But the Bible says that Esau despised his birthright. And I talked about Jacob versus Esau. Who is God going to pick? And he's picked Jacob. And we went with this. Well, Jacob's got chutzpah. He wants it. But when you get to this point in the story, you ought to start to see something that, what does God need from his nation? He needs a Behor. That's what this is about. Esau did not want to be the Behor. He despised his role as Behor, is essentially what that's saying. At that point, you say, well, whatever else there is between these two, it can't be Esau. If the whole point of what God needs is to be a Behor, it can't be Esau if he despises his role as Behor. But there's something else that happens with these brothers, and it happens in Genesis 33. And I'm going to ask you to recall, okay? Do we have in that story? So this is when Jacob is coming back into the land. He's getting ready to meet Esau. And they're going to have a little reunion, okay? Do we have the death of a Behor in that story? Now we're looking, I think you're looking for something you're probably not going to find there. I don't think we're going to have that. I'm going to skip a feast for now. Do we have leaving a country with children and flocks? Absolutely. That's exactly what Jacob is doing. Do we have pursued by military and officers? Not military and officers, but is he pursued? He's pursued by Laban. And we have Esau with his 400 men coming. So we've got a military escort. And was there supposed to be a military escort? Did Esau offer a military escort?
Yes.
Absolutely. We've got that. Do we have crossing a body of water? Absolutely. Because Jacob camps out on one side of the body of the water. That's when he wrestles with God and he's got to cross the river. It makes a big deal about he's fording this river with his flocks and with his children and his wives. So he's crossing a body of water. We don't really have the consecration of the firstborn, but this is kind of about, like, this whole story is about who is the firstborn, who's the Behor in this family. And do we have singing and dancing? So I skipped a feast. Is there a feast in this story? And the answer, you're kind of shaking your head. Like, the answer is no. Like, they don't get together and eat. But what do you think Esau is intending to do here? So he meets his brother. He's like, what's the meaning of all these flocks? And he's like, they're for you. And he's like, I don't need them. He's like, and look at all these children. He's like, they're your children. He's like, it's great. You got children? And then Esau says, well, come on, let's go. Man, let's go back home. What do you think Esau is going to do? Why does he want to go back home? He's going to put the family back together. And what is the first thing you're going to do, you think, when he gets back home? What's in his mind? I finally got my brother back. 20 years he's been gone. And when he left, I wanted to kill him. But now I'm so happy to see him. I want him back. What do you think is the first thing that he's going to do when they get home? We're going to party. Come on, Jacob, let's go back home. We're going to have a celebration that they will talk about forever in this land. Because I'm the richest guy in the land. I'm going to throw a celebration for you. We're going to kill the fatted calf. We're going to have, you think they might sing and dance? We're going to have singing and dancing. But does it happen? Jacob does not allow it. He's like, no, I can't. The tender ones of the flock and my young. And no, well, let me leave some men with you. No, I can't do that. And then he goes somewhere else. Goes to Shechem, actually, where bad things happen in Shechem. And then after that, we've got death and death and death in the chapter after that. Rachel's going to die. Rebecca's handmaid is going to die. And Isaac's going to die in the chapter after that. It's like all bad things. Do we have, in the last story I said we had reconciliation of the brothers after this. Do we have reconciliation of the brothers at the end of this? Well, sort of. Like they made up and then they split. Actually, part of what happens in Genesis 50 is it specifically says that Joseph takes care of them. He provides for them because they're still in the family. Actually, I'm not sure about that. But it says that Joseph provides for his brothers. And that does not happen in this story because Jacob does not allow it. All right. We've dug a hole here. We've dug a deep hole. Because now we've got 3 stories. And they're all a little bit different, right? They certainly have the same element. Would you agree that, like, the Bible's done this on purpose? Like, there's enough in common with these stories that the Bible is doing this on purpose. It's part of what God is trying to say. I'm seeing a lot of nods. Yeah, absolutely. This is part of what the Bible is trying to tell us. But we've got different things happening in each one of these. In the first story, there's no feast because Jacob's going to be deceitful again. He's not going to allow it. He's going to be stubborn and he's going to go off on his own. In the second one is almost like where everything's right. Joseph comes to Pharaoh and he's like, I need to go bury my father. And Pharaoh doesn't just say yes. He sends him off with all of the dignitaries of Egypt. This very large company goes. And the people around in the area are seeing it and they're in awe of what's happening here. But there's no singing and dancing because this is a funeral procession that we're going on. And then in the last story, it kind of goes wrong because why? What's wrong with the last story? Like, why is it not a happy occasion like where everything happens right? Because Pharaoh says no. And he pursues them with the military to capture them, I think is what he's going for, to bring them back as slaves. So we've got 3 stories. They're all a little bit different. They've definitely got the same elements. What are we going to do with this? And to explain this, I'm going to cheat. Because someone, I believe, told us what this all means and what we're supposed to get out of it. And it happens to be Jesus in Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15, we have this story of the prodigal son. And let's read it. I have another volunteer. We're going to start in Luke 15, verse 11, and go to the end of the chapter. Any volunteers? All right.
Starting with verse 11.
Yes.
Jesus continued, there was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of his estate. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of the country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring this best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called out one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill a fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, You are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we have to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again, and he was lost and is found.
All right, so we have this verse that I love. Jesus is going to tie this story to the Jacob and Esau reunion with that verse 20. So he got up and went to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. So this is exactly what Esau does. And it's got some of these elements from the story, right? There's a feast, there's singing and dancing, at least that part of it. But is everything as it's supposed to be? Do we have all of the elements together right?
Seems as though the older brother still has a problem.
The older brother still has a problem. He doesn't want to come into the feast. And this turns out this is the exact opposite of this story, right? Of Jacob and Esau. Because Esau is the older brother. He's welcomed him back. He wants to throw a party for his younger brother who's come back, but his younger brother doesn't want to come into this feast. And Jesus tells the story, well, the younger brother has come back, but the older brother doesn't want to come into this feast. And this is brilliant what Jesus did. By the way, it's tied to that Jacob and Esau story. But on a much deeper level, it's tied to so much more of Genesis. It turns out this story has more in common with Abraham than it does with Jacob. Because Abraham's going to leave because there's a famine. Only everything is switched around from Abraham's story. It's got all of these elements, but everything is switched around. And there's this part of this where the older brother says, this son of yours who has squandered your wealth with prostitutes. Who did that? Abraham didn't do that. Jacob didn't do that. Who did that? Who went and slept with what he thought was a prostitute and lost property? Judah. There are pieces of everyone from Genesis in this story. But what does God want? What is Jesus saying? Can't you see what God wants? What does God want? What does the Father want in this story?
He wants them all together to come
He
back.
wants everybody at the party. Everybody belongs at the party. And it gets messed up sometimes. Sometimes it's because the younger brother, well, he comes back, but he doesn't come back fully. Sometimes it's because the one in power doesn't want to let them go. Sometimes it's because the sinful one won't come back. Sometimes it's because the righteous one won't accept the sinful one. But what God really wants is all of his children together at the party. That is Jesus' take. It's not just his take on what God wants. It's his take on what these three stories mean. He is explaining to us what Torah means. He's trying to teach these Pharisees and teachers of the law what Torah means. And he's, look, I crafted this brilliant story for you, where I'm going to bring in all these elements and show you what's going on. And can't you see that what God really wants? When Jacob comes back, here's a question. When Jacob comes back and he meets Esau, he's not going to go join Esau. He's going to go off on his own. Is that what God wanted? That's an interesting question. Did God want him to come back and join Esau? Or did God want him to lie and go off and be on his own? Anybody want to wager?
I'd say he wanted them together. Maybe
We got it. That he wanted them together?
he could influence Esau, and Esau, they would just become a family again.
Yeah, that they could become a family again. Anybody want to take the opposite side? And is anybody thinking, I don't know, I think you wanted him to go off on his own? I'm not saying that there's a right or a wrong answer here. But I will say that after Jacob does this, what follows? Tragedy, death, despair, all following from this decision. He goes to Shechem, and his daughter is raped, and then his children kill the whole village. And he's not happy about either one of these things. And then, basically, the only person that he loves, or the person that he loves the most on this whole earth, dies, and he thinks it's his fault. Later, he's going to think that it's his fault. Bad things happen after this decision, which I think in the narrative is a way of us telling us, that's not what God wanted.
And what follows down through the centuries is conflict between Esau's descendants, the Edomites, and the Israelites.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if Jesus is saying, really what I want is all of you together, really what I want is for you to be a Behor. I want the Canaanites to stand in awe of you and to come to me because of what you're doing. That is what God is trying to tell us through this story. I need a Behor. Man, I really wanted Pharaoh to do what the first Pharaoh did. To let you all go, to send you off with fanfare. And say, you're going to worship your God? Let me worship him too. And he tries through 10 plagues to convince him to do that. He does finally convince him that he is God. That he should submit to him. It happens after the 7th plague. But Pharaoh is stubborn and it won't happen. God says, I got to get my Behor out because I've got a job for them to do. It's a rough road. It is a rough road. But this is what God is trying to do. Any comments? Any questions? All right, there we go.